Listen and practice.
Ahmet grew up in the stony places where making love, hands and lips were always prohibited in social dungeons with thousands of variables. Lonely as the mountains, with his height as high as them, he was able to fit their drought into his loneliness. However, one day he would experience, even if only for a short time, what a delicious choice of forbidden passion was, even though he didn't know it yet. It was his first time leaving this geography. While the sun was making new scratches into the darkness of the morning, on the one hand, it did not speak at all with the strange shyness of traveling with peers it had never met, and on the other hand, its face was smiling with the delicate excitement of exploring new and unimaginably distant geographies. Even though there were a few people he knew among these young migratory birds on the road, the journey was long, the flights were arduous, the waiting was heavy, the cigarettes were in rows, and the heavy suitcases were always a burden on his body. He didn't care much, but he always carried a thoughtful and tired child with him. That innocent child, who has proven himself to the top in table tennis matches for years, but has become tired and needed by life as he rushes from one knowledge to the next in the compulsory engineering school, in the manner of an Indian caste system, which is rather than poverty, wealth and status, due to the pressure of his family. He had never been in love, he tried but couldn't, he wasn't killed. This was always his fear. He knew very well that the social caste had not yet disappeared from the streets and that it was full of drumbrains looking for the equal of love. He thought about these as the hard glass hit his forehead from time to time. He clearly wasn't having any fun among the young people who were having fun with music in cars, planes, trains, and shuttles along the way. His teacher, who was aware of this whole situation, was especially harsh on him, and when they came to the training environment 3,000 kilometers away, the teacher's prodding became obvious. Even though it was sincere, it was difficult for Ahmet, and the loss of self-confidence that emerged when not knowing the language was added to that foreignness. While all the students were getting along with dances and games, his shyness was gushing out of his bones. It was reflected on his face, his cheeks were turning red. Sometimes someone would sit next to him and ask him in another language, "How are you?" if he asks. In fact, he had to express himself. What he could do would be enough if he were more or less aware of what he could do. The team leader, who is aware of his situation, stays in the same room with him and calls him especially as his chief assistant in all social events. Even though Ahmet never failed to respect his teacher and stayed away from him as much as possible without offending him, he danced arm in arm with young people from other countries at all events, asked them questions with a little knowledge of the language, and sometimes silently waited in the corner while the group he was assigned to was working. Another person, who sensed this situation much better, was standing at the edge of the room. A girl of his own age, height and, strangely, with his own temperament, who was both his own teacher and the assistant of one of the foreign instructors, seemed to sense his situation very well and approached Ahmet knowingly. On the other hand, it didn't take long for Ahmet to notice her and understand what was going on. A young lady stood there tall, like a woman who was beautiful in her beauty and joyful in her joy. Ahmet was looking around with as simple and shy eyes as possible. His teacher, with his practical intelligence, seemed to have solved the biggest problem, communication, by installing a simple phone application for his children, allowing machine translation for interlingual translations even in an environment without the internet. The foreign assistant instructor, who had given up hope on verbal communication, also adapted to this situation, and one day, he suddenly grabbed his phone from Ahmet's hand, quickly opened the translation program while browsing through the menus and asked him, "Are you bored?" or he wrote something to that effect. While Ahmet's cheeks were red and he was trying to pick up his phone with a smile on his face, he saw the question and wrote something. Later, the assistant instructor, who saw the car picture on Ahmet's phone screen and was also interested in vehicles, wanted to show him that his own car was a similar vehicle, and they went for a drive in the pristine nature of a Central European countryside. As the days passed, the conversations deepened. Ahmet got used to that girl, and he gifted her the car he owned, which Ahmet could not even dream of buying due to his poverty and the conditions of the country, by making a pencil drawing. While on the one hand he envied the girl's life and her liberal attitude, on the other hand he couldn't help but feel sorry for what he went through. However, it would not take long for the movements called emotions to shock him too. Even though he is electrified, he is too petrified to be able to move, and in the evening hours, when his timid heart meets his own social fears right before sleep, he suddenly says to his teacher, with whom he is staying in the same room, "Teacher, I think I like this girl." Despite the encouragement and support given by his teacher, who postponed his shy questions with aggressive irony, he actually could not do anything. A few days before the return trip, Ahmet was spending most of the day walking and having meals with the assistant instructor lady and trying to talk as much as possible. One of the last nights, he turned to his teacher in a shy manner and said, "Teacher, I will hold that girl's hand tomorrow," and he curled up in his bed and hid under his covers. Even though he knew he wouldn't be able to escape. When his teacher suddenly stopped being the angel of interrogation, he couldn't hold back his words and would explain that he would use one of the most naive and beautiful tactics in the world. He would ask our daughter what she had in her hand as if she were surprising her, ask her to open her palm, and quickly grasp the open hand with her own hand and hold it. Even though it seemed very funny when you first heard it, that naivety suited some people so well, everyone would have guessed that he could look so beautiful, especially Ahmet. After all, he was a tall child with a naivety about him and the beauty of his soul reflected on his face. It could even be said that he was too brave by his standards. Even though he didn't have much hope, his teacher smiled when he noticed that the next day, when he went to the garden to smoke a cigarette after searching for tea and coffee at the training center, while he was busy with his phone in his hand, two young people passed right in front of him, holding hands. One of them was too tall and looked like Ahmet, one of the beautiful details of that scene. The problem is, the last day, the last evening, the last hours and the last adventure were the result there. It was as if a miracle in one of those mountain villages of the European countryside had made the world a better place for a second. Knowingly, Ahmet and Adriana were hand in hand, knowing that they would separate from each other the next day. Just to make Ahmet smile. He also knew that perhaps he had suddenly fallen into the most international of forbidden love. However, when he came to his teacher's room that night and went to bed happily, even the strange movements of the muscles on his face, separated from each other, were worth telling or experiencing. Ahmet deliberately stayed away from you, and even held the hand of the lady he cared about there, stubbornly showing everyone that a kiss could be more sincere and beautiful than many loves.